The Reckoning is a lamentable point in history for the Emperor's liberators and their homeworld of battlement. Misunderstandings and deceptions, exacerbated by the Great Conspirator, were the true cause of this destructive war. A rebellion too far. Recently, 3 Astartes and the Emperor's liberators were ordered to defend the planet of submission despite its brutal tyrant of a governor. Unknown to the liberators, the 3 Astartes would go rogue and overthrow the tyrannical governor, spurred by their personal beliefs. However, this rebellion was so destructive that it disrupted the planet and led to the fall of half the entire sector. The Ordo Hereticus blamed the liberators for the resulting events. Tzeentch, meanwhile, knew that the liberators were highly controversial in the Astartes community and had earned the ire of numerous chapters and the Ordo Hereticus. Their godsmen allies, the Agents of Liberty, were similarly infamous but didn't have the protection or autonomy of power-armored demigods. Once Tzeentch manipulated these rivalries, the 1,776 Emperor's Liberators and 2 million Agents of Liberty would either be converted to chaos or taken out of the picture. The warband of word-bearers on battlement, known as the Tolban, were instructed by Tzeentch to summon demons. The closest force of liberators that could respond were a force led by Davidius Clarkson, who deployed from the continent of Merike and landed in Battlement's Central East region to do battle. The liberators and Agents of Liberty mistakenly rushed to defend the Promethean refineries in the region, not knowing the Tolban sought a much different objective. The Tolban were too powerful to keep under control, and their invasion of real space was detected by the Grey Knights. The intervention of the Grey Knights would be a poisoned chalice for battlement. As Tzeentch planned, the Grey Knights did their standard purge of civilians to the ire of the liberators, who were overprotective of civilians. A bewildered Davidius Clarkson demands the leading Justicar to stop firing on the civilians and their guardsmen allies, the Agents of Liberty. After many impassioned pleas in vain, Clarkson is convinced that the Grey Knights are traitors and orders his now enraged unit to open fire on them. He never knew who the Grey Knights were or their standard procedures to fight chaos, and he no longer cared. After a brutal 8-day skirmish, 182 liberators lay dead in exchange for 90 Grey Knights. The rest of the knights left battlement, reporting the events to the Inquisition. Gathering allies, Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor Marquis Zaken soon received news on the skirmish. Zaken was a particular foe of the liberators and suspicious of their values. Alexis Johnson, Reclusiac of the liberators, angrily defied Zaken's request to adjust the chapter's values to be more adherent to the imperial dogma. Suspicion festered into open distrust over the years, and Zaken was first among the chapter's biggest detractors. Petitions to get them censored were always denied, but when Zaken was unknowingly possessed by a demon during a campaign in Los Angelium, everything changed. The demon's subtle manipulations and Zaken's existing disdain for the liberators led him to believe that they were heretics and had to be culled, given recent events. Assaulting battlement required a massive force with the proper allies. Marquis Zaken convinced his friend, Inquisitor Jackson Dorsicus of the Ordo Hereticus, to join his crusade. Zaken and Dorsicus recruited 3 million of the Vostroyan firstborn with great ease. Both Inquisitors were infamous for liberally using edicts of obliteration, and their willingness to censor information made them prominent members of the Ordo Redactus. The ornate, carapace-armored Vostroyans could either bask in the glory of humbling a traitor Astartes chapter or be erased from imperial history. 5,000 Adeptus Sororitas would volunteer for the sacred duty of purging battlement and its heretical practices. The Marines Malevolent, Saber Lions, Murdering Suns, Destroyers of Worlds, and Imperious Ravagers were notorious for tearing apart civilian populations and paying no heed to innocents. Zaken needed only to appeal to their sense of duty and loyalty for every chapter to send 150 Astartes. Some of them were fueled by long-standing grudges too. The Albus Domus and the Hexagon were made to match the magnificence of their ancient Terran counterparts in Murica while being as fortified as any fortress monastery. Mikey Zucken would have to requisition 12 Hellhammers, 1,000 Chimeras and Sentinels, 500 Leman Russ Eradicators, and 600 Manticore missile systems. The sororities would deploy 500 immolators and penitent engines, while the Astartes brought their own equipment as needed. Mikey Zucken now had his retribution force, whose men and women were eager to bring forth the Emperor's wrath. They had no idea that it was actually the wrath of a demon-possessed man with a vendetta. Arrival. The Retribution fleet screamed out of the warp with 2 battleships, 3 Astartes strike cruisers, and swarms of escorts. Battlement's Astral Force only had 2 decently armed space platforms, as well as the battle barge Lady Liberty and 2 strike cruisers. The space battle was quick but brutal. A horde of attack craft quickly overtook Battlement's home fleet and inflicted heavy damage. Only the defending spacecraft of the Emperor's Liberators were standing. One inquisitorial battleship was crippled by lightning strikes and sustained barrages, though the Liberators lost a strike cruiser and had another one crippled. Though the Inquisition had void superiority, the Lady Liberty would continue to harass her foes for the rest of the war. Awestruck civilians on Battlement saw the sky lit with explosions, but none of them knew what was truly coming. Though they weren't alone, the murdering suns and destroyers of worlds were the first to begin their slaughter. The destroyers swiftly killed their way through the cities, while the murdering suns were grimly slow and methodical by contrast. Droppods tore down many skyscrapers, while other sections of the cities were torn down with melter, flame and cannon. The 50 cities of Merikay would become smoldering mass graves. Executive Davidius Clarkson and head apothecary Benjamin Carsonius looked to the skies and saw burning metal figures crashing into the ground. They were in command of only 476 liberators and 500,000 agents of liberty after engaging the Grey Knights earlier. Clarkson rushed his forces to the cities to find absolute pandemonium. The streets were awash in gore. Benjamin Carsonius struggled in vain to mend the wounded civilians sprawled on the ground, whose death scarred him until his dying days. Davidius Clarkson could only ask Benjamin to save civilians without mortal wounds, while sending the bulk of his force to fight off the rampaging Astartes, Sisters and Vastroians. Agents of Liberty and the Liberators scaled buildings or fought in dust-shrouded streets, struggling to save civilians where possible. The attackers took advantage of such empathy in deadly ambushes, inflicting casualties that Clarkson's unit couldn't afford. Hard choices. Clarkson and Carsonius quickly realized that the invaders were here for the long haul, and the cities of Merikay were lost. Together with commanders from the Agents of Liberty, they devised a general evacuation plan. Small teams would scout a weakness through the enemy lines, then force open a corridor where the civilians could be evacuated en masse. Women and children would take the fastest vehicles and aircraft, followed by the wounded. Everyone else would march for 36 miles until they reached the Alpes Domus and its underground shelters, while under constant bombardment and air attacks. Carsonius personally intervened in a number of raids meant to get civilians out of trapped buildings. He was either greeted by mangled corpses as a sign that he was too late, or challenged by torture masters from the murdering suns. Clarkson would use his jump pack to scale many skyscrapers, but had to slog his way through stubbornly entrenched, imperious ravagers. These ravagers nearly killed Clarkson on many occasions, thanks to the strategic use of combat shields in the tight hallways. Agents of Liberty were bogged down against the Vastroians and sororities as they looked for weaknesses and ambush points against the encroaching invaders. Battlement's defenders would march their way to the Capitol buildings, their ranks thinned by the second as immolators incinerated entire columns of stragglers, while the destroyers of worlds hounded their prey on bikes and land speeders. Manticore rockets cratered the retreating formations, while penitent engines rampaged through any weak points. Terminator-armored revolutionaries from the Liberators sold their lives dearly as they delayed the enemy, while allied Thunderhawks and Predators drew attention to themselves instead of the civilians. 82 liberators and a couple 100,000 agents were killed as they bought time for them. But they couldn't buy nearly enough time for the civilians. Only 40% of the 1.7 billion civilians were escorted to safety. The following weeks would only get worse as the raging Davidius Clarkson demanded an immediate explanation from the lead inquisitor. It had only been a day and a half. Ultimatum. Zucken demanded that the chapter go on a 500-year penitent crusade and forsake the values of their holy books for Inquisition-approved replacements. Marquez explained that the liberators had forced his hand after the events on submission, in addition to endangering the Grey Knights. The murdering sons played the screams of tortured captives over loudspeakers to demoralize the defenders and drive home Zucken's point. Clarkson struggled to hide his rage at the audacity of Zucken's demands. Prior to departing for the parley, Clarkson ordered his forces to fortify the capital district and secure valuable assets. A day had passed when Zucken felt the negotiations were a ruse and ordered his retinue to open fire on Davidius Clarkson. The liberators had covertly placed Primaris Reavers and Eliminators to ensure Clarkson fought his way to safety. The Emperor's liberators did not negotiate with terrorists. A hurricane of fire and hastily built strongholds greeted Zucken's attack. His murderous brutality in Marquez cities ensured the defenders were possessed by rage. They only wanted to slaughter those who defiled their soil, and no price was too great in closing breaches opened by Terminators and Hellhammers or repulsing enemy formations. The attackers could only advance thanks to sheer numbers and steady bombardments, with many of their ranks being turned to blood-soaked ash by the weaponry of the Albus Domus and its occupants. Just approaching the South Lawn resulted in apocalyptic losses, but the undermanned defenses were slowly whittled down. The people defending the Hexagon and the Albus Domus were soon cut off and surrounded. Clash of Wills. Clarkson sent a desperate vox message to executives Alexis Johnson and Tedium Lagentus of the current situation. Combined, they led 1,300 Astartes and 1.5 million agents of liberty. It would take 2 weeks for them to arrive, time the defenders might not have. Davidius Clarkson had to hold and made every soldier under his command hunker down. The Inquisitor's forces poured into both buildings with pure fury in their veins, killing and burning everything in their way. With their backs to the walls, the agents and liberators resisted with all their might. Blood and gore would fill the hallways and stain the walls of their respective buildings. The Sable Lions led the push inside the Hexagon, rampaging their way through every corridor. The Imperious Ravagers used their specialized lancery to methodically push the defenders into a corner, where they were subsequently massacred. These hapless defenders were surrounded by steel and marble walls of their own making decades ago. Only 10 liberators and 2,000 agents escaped and fled to the Albus Domus. The dead defenders were hung up on the walls and nailed to them, with their blood being used to paint messages of doom. The Hexagon had fallen after a week. The attackers then regrouped to storm the Albus Domus itself. The western wing was blown open and the attackers flooded through. Inquisitor Jackson Dorsicus led half of the force against Davidius Clarkson's pocket of resistance in the Library of Liberty, which held the books the Inquisitor deemed heretical. The rest pushed towards the plasma reactors. There were the few areas left in the Albus Domus still out of the Inquisition's hands, and there were only 160 liberators and 100,000 agents left to defend them against 600 Astartes, 3,000 Sisters, and 1 million Vestroians. The plasma reactors were ferociously protected. Narrow corridors filled with booby traps made for horrific kill zones. The defenders would use the dead bodies as barricades, their power-armored corpses making excellent armored cover. Terminators were the only ones who could force open a breach, but even these were tenuously held as frantic melee combat ensued. Benjamin Calsonius himself would personally lead counter-pushes with his bolter and reductor to force the enemy back. Ambitious sororitas and Astartes tried and failed to bring the vengeful head apothecary low. If the reactor had fallen to the enemy, they could have been overloaded and the entire building would have become a smoldering crater. quest for knowledge. While Clarkson and his forces struggled to keep the hordes of enemies from burning down the Alberstomus entirely, Marcus Zuckin had other ideas. He had always suspected the Emperor's liberators and the Agents of Liberty had something to hide. Discovering everything they were hiding was the only reason he didn't launch cyclonic torpedoes onto the planet already. Zuckin brought with him a personal detachment of Sable Lions, Stormtroopers, Sororitas, and many Vestroyans as his entourage. These soldiers would escort Marcus Zuckin as he forced his way into a classified location below the Alberstomus known as Site 51. Whether it held unsanctioned tests for technology, xenotech, live xenas, or other forbidden knowledge, its secrets would be uncovered. The Xantian demon that secretly possessed Zuckin gave him the psychic power to detect the hidden area and dozens of souls below. Battleman's president, along with secretive service bodyguards, were there. The Agents of Liberty sent Black Ops and Juggernauts for support. Using melter charges, Zuckin managed to blast his way into the area and begin his quest. The Secretive Service, Black Ops and Juggernauts put up fierce resistance that was expected from Scout Marines. With their president and many secrets behind them, sustained defiance was the only option. Massive fire raged, unhindered by the choking smoke or growing pile of corpses. The Secretive Service was equipped with digital weapons and could exploit unique angles to attack to great effect. The Black Ops would use their tactics to flank entire enemy groups, while the Juggernauts kept entire lanes suppressed with miniguns or quad-barreled rocket launchers. Unfortunately, their power-armored foes would not be denied. Astartes and Sororitas quickly overwhelmed the ever-shrinking pockets of resistance. Eventually, there was only the command bunker itself. A few Secretive Service agents presided over the president. Their ammo was gone and were down to crack and frag grenades. After managing to kill a few Sororitas and an encroaching squad of Stormtroopers, there was no ammo. The secret command bunker was suddenly breached with a melter bomb, with the Sororitas and Sable Lions taking point. It was a slaughter. The president was quickly subdued and interrogated by Zuckin. The rooms were protected by bulkheads thick enough to resist melter charges, and physically cutting through them would take weeks. He demanded the codes to unlock the rooms, and his interrogation tactics would be brutal and exacting. Defense of the library. As the battle for Site 51 concluded, Davidius Clarkson was struggling to hold the Library of Liberty. Most of the Sororitas and Astartes had converged here, knowing the Liberators prioritized the ancient books that shaped their values. Clarkson sought to heal the wounded, many of whom he'd fought alongside in the revolution against the Tau decades ago, but they told him that he was needed outside more than he was in the library. Clarkson stepped into the battle to rally his troops and was greeted by enemy fire. Charging Sororitas were incinerated with his Combine melter. A murdering sun slashed into Clarkson's shoulder with a lightning claw, but was in turn pummeled by Clarkson's power fist and bolter. Some Marines Malevolent would impale Clarkson, but Clarkson's Emancipator Honor Guard would intervene in the nick of time and blast away his assailants. Clarkson and his forces would fight to stem the tide for over an hour. Jackson Dorsicus was personally leading his forces when he encountered Clarkson, who had just finished a mid-air duel with a Sable Lion. He bellowed out a challenge and branded Davidius as a heretic before sending the Astartes sprawling with multiple power sword strikes. Despite a cut arm, Clarkson responded with punishing counterblows from his power fist, but this was cut short when Dorsicus blasted him with a plasma shot. Although sent flying, Clarkson's jump pack stabilized him and he surged forward, sending bolt shells and melter toward the Inquisitor. With his armor shredded, Jackson swung at Clarkson and managed to impale his torso. Unfortunately for him, Clarkson kept Jackson from removing the sword. The retaliatory power fist smashed his skull and left him dazed. A bolt round to the temple ensured Jackson's demise. Following this, the Sisters and attacking Astartes were thrown into a sort of unnatural fury that pushed the defenders further back. The attackers quickly breached the great steel doors guarding the Library of Liberty and had finally cornered the defenders. Though the library had multiple floors and balconies, there was no escaping it. Every bookshelf was protected with small stasis and reactor fields, but they'd be easy prey for the vengeful attackers if the defenders fell. It was in this library that the men and women of Battlement would make their final stand. Their leader, Clarkson, was gravely wounded by a destroyer of worlds that had impaled one of his hearts. Reinforcements. Out in space, Alexis Johnson and Tedium Nagentis emerged from the warp with the entire chapter fleet and quickly broke the Inquisitor's blockade through daring boarding actions and lightning strikes. Tedium Nagentis spearheaded the boarding assaults with his lightning claw and wrist-mounted assault cannon tearing through the defenses. Nagentis and his forces rapidly overwhelmed the enemy crew members and took them prisoner for the rest of the battle. He and most of his strike force would then use teleporters to reach Battlement. The remaining liberators and agents poured onto the surface via drop pod or Thunderhawk directly to the Hexagon and Albus Domus. The best soldiers, including Executive Alexis Johnson and a squad of emancipators, were directly teleported to Site 51. It took 12 hours for half of the assaulting forces to retake the Hexagon. The other half immediately rushed into the Albus Domus, hoping they weren't too late. The combined 1,300 Marines and 1.5 million agents were in a race against time. Cleansing the exterior. As the liberators and agents relieved their beleaguered kin in the buildings, they realized the enemy had blockaded the exterior with armored units and artillery. Thanks to the fickle nature of the warp, only 200 vehicles could be deployed. It would be led by the head tech marine Michael Rosen and Freeblade Knight Libertatum Primus. Both men were heroes of the revolution against the Tau. They'd lead 10,000 juggernauts from the Agents of Liberty, 10 repulsors, 50 predators and 140 Leman Russ tanks. Primus would crush Sororitas rhinos and immolators with his graviton gun while cratering enemy formations with his missile launcher. Rosen would lead his repulsors as they cut down enemy infantry with ease, and he'd even unleashed deadly Xenos weaponry taken as trophies from his time in the Death Watch. Manticore emplacements were quickly overrun, ensuring they'd no longer damage the already burning Albus Domus any further. The enemy response would be fierce. Though the destroyers of worlds were CQC enthusiasts, they were still sons of Jacketai Khan. They would show Libertatum Primus where the 50 cities of Merikay fell in under 24 hours. Their bikes and land speeders wasted no time in exacting a fearsome toll, crippling tanks and cutting down juggernauts in their hundreds. His unit faced heavy losses as they couldn't react in time, losing dozens of fighters for every destroyer they could kill in return. Primus and his unit were slowed down heavily, and many of them were turned to slag by the reorganized Sororitas and Vostroyans. Despite taking a tank shell to the leg, Primus used his lightning cannon and missile launcher to wreak havoc on his enemies. Roberson's repulsor was immobilized, but it could still fire, and it forced the enemy back. Undeterred by the severe losses, Libertatum Primus turned to face two penitent engines with his lightning claw. One of them was bisected, while the other managed to strike Primus with a chain fist. Before it could cut into essential circuitry, Primus sliced off the engine's arm and crushed the occupant with his graviton gun. Unfortunately, another immolator with multi-melters would destroy the knight's leg and send him on his back. The remaining juggernauts quickly rushed to his aid, knowing that Primus was the best chance for Battlement's finest to endure the fight for mankind's freedom. The final stand against the vengeful Sororitas, Destroyers of Worlds and Vostroyans would be immortalized by the Agents of Liberty. The other inquisitorial vehicles engaged the remaining strike force, trading numerous casualties as they did so. A vast armored battle raged in the north and south lawns of the Albus Domus, with neither side yielding but unable to advance. Final duel. Alexis Johnson and his men quickly ran into the Inquisitor's forces in Site 51. They found the floor charred with equally brutalized and maimed bodies. Their thermal vision and memory of the floor layout guided their way through until they ran into the underground command bunker itself, as well as the enemy that was occupying it. A massive firefight began, which interrupted Marquis Zakin's interrogation against the president in the nick of time. The battery of physical and psychic torture was starting to become too much for him to handle alone. Johnson and his men engaged the Inquisitor's forces while he would end Marquis Zakin once and for all. Various projectiles tore apart power-armored combatants. Both sides fought like rabid dogs. As the two forces fought it out, Reclusiarch Alexis Johnson faced his nemesis, Marquis Zakin. The two men tore into each other. All their existing hatred for each other would be put behind every strike. Earth-shattering blows were thrown that left them bloodied. Johnson sent a volley of flame and bolt of fire against the Inquisitor, which briefly melted away his face. Johnson stared bewildered as the demon inside the Inquisitor had been revealed. Before he could reveal his discovery, the Inquisitor sent a psychic blast that stunned everyone in the room. The Liberators got up first and gunned down their foes. Despite this shocking development, Battlement's invaders would never surrender to perceived heretics. Zakin used various psychic attacks that mauled Johnson before trying to strangle him to death. Unwilling to quit, Johnson swung his croziers into the Inquisitor's hand and chopped it off before slamming it into the Inquisitor's head. The demon regrew Zakin's hand and scorched Johnson with psychic fires. Head librarian Harrison Houdinium knew those flames anywhere, and he rushed downstairs to douse the flames before sending a psychic lance at the demon. The demon howled in pain as he retaliated with his own powers. The distraction was all Johnson needed, and he drenched the demon in burning promethium. Although grievously wounded, the demon wouldn't die. Houdinium summoned psychic lightning in conjunction with holy verses by Johnson to finally banish the demon. Zakin was devoid of strength and marked with bone-deep wounds. The Inquisitor was back to his true self, but to Johnson, Zakin's true self was pure evil and a representation of the rot that currently plagued the Imperium. He used his combi flamer and burned Zakin to death. Zakin never managed to uncover the tightly sealed rooms inside 51, for the President had resisted his interrogation. The secret of the Albus Domus, for now, was safe. Upstairs, a bloodied Clarkson roared his defiance at a group of enemy Terminators and Sororitas, and for every skull his power fist crushed, 3 more power-armored foes would inflict fresh gashes and cuts. Clarkson's 2 remaining Emancipators battled with equal defiance as they were swiftly cut down, with broken power swords or toothless chainswords in hand. In a puddle of his own blood, Clarkson loaded his last melter canister as he faced his assailants. The last stand was cut short when the enemy was mowed down by an assault cannon. Tedium Nagentus had arrived and cut down the attackers. He'd previously saved the plasma reactors that Carsonius held. Nagentus led multiple squads as they scoured the entire Albus Domus, mercilessly slaying anyone who sought to destroy the sacred building. The eastern and western wings were a smoldering heap, but they belonged to the Liberators after an hour of desperate fighting. The agents and Liberators quickly poured outside of the Albus Domus and Hexagon to find a burning scrapyard. The Sororitas and Inquisitorial vehicles had fought Libertatum Primus and his men to mutual destruction. The knight was still on his back, and a shredded penitent engine rested on the knight's mangled chassis. Primus was pinned in place thanks to his destroyed leg. 2 heavily wounded juggernauts from the Agents of Liberty flanked the knight with bolt pistols in hand. The mass of corpses gave further evidence of the legendary stand. Michael Rosen rushed to repair Primus's knight. Battlement's defenders were now charging at their attackers with blind rage, with a desire to make their enemies pay in blood. They didn't just massacre the retreating defenders, but sought to burn the enemy gene seed. Fierce rearguard actions frustrated such efforts, allowing the Inquisition to leave Battlement. Until they fled into the warp, the Inquisitorial fleet was hounded by the Liberators. Carrying out Zakin's will had killed over half the entire force, with the Astartes losing 40% of their gene seed. Defying Zakin's will left Battlement with just 700 Liberators and just over 1 million agents. The Star-Spangled Fist remained standing over the scorched landscape of battlement. The planet was sentenced to exterminatus and its defenders declared renegades. Even worse, corsairs would increase their activity near battlement in response to the planet's weakened state. Tzeentchian and Slaaneshi demons would travel to the planet trying to subvert the population and its downtrodden protectors. The Blood Gorgons Chaos Astartes, who emphasize freedom and independence like the Liberators, redoubled their efforts to turn the Liberators against the Emperor. Regarding the Inquisition and those who defiled battlement, the Emperor's Liberators would now refer to them as the Axis of Evil. As for battlement's downtrodden citizens and defenders, none could be at fault for assuming the war for humanity's freedom was now all but lost.